Welcome back. Well, Mark Lamberti's resignation from the Eskom and BLSA boards, along with his resignation as Imperial CEO following a dignity ruling by the High Court against him, calls for a greater discussion around the transformation of South Africa's corporate landscape. This against a Jack Hammer report from last year, which showed that transformation jumped 8% in the private sector. Israel Noko, who's CEO of NPI Governance Consulting, joins us in studio now with his views. Thanks so much, Israel, for your time today. So I highlighted there a Jack Hammer report. It came through pointing to this notable turning of the tide when it comes to transformation. And on the back of that, we've had the CEO say what the increase we've seen means is that the number of BEE executive level appointments is not just incremental, it's significant and gaining momentum year on year. Do you share that view?
No, unfortunately, I don't share that view at all, because if you just look at a recent report that was done by the Employment Equity Commission just last year, the figures show to the contrary. In actual fact, the figures that they're showing that 68% of top management positions are still currently taken over by white males, and then that's followed by Indian people. But if you then deep dive into the provinces like the Free State and the Western Cape are showing figures like 70% being of organizations that are still being led by, white males today. So I am not too sure in terms of the sort of improvement that, the report is referring to, but I suspect it's really just talking about the BE points, which you and I both know that's not what transformation is about. Absolutely.
I mean, there certainly has been this ongoing pressure to transform at senior management and executive levels within corporates. One wonders, though, is there a growing pool of talent at senior management level to match the demand that is being created?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, if you just think about it, since 1990, the amount of African and colored and Indian university students that walked out of our universities, the pool is extremely big. I'm at a personal level 47 years old, and if you look at my peer group today, many of them are running their own businesses, have qualifications, have over 20 years of experience. It just goes to show that in actual fact there is a lot of talent in there. So it's just a myth that there isn't talent out there.
Okay, so with the context then clarified, Israel, has this exercise, transformation of the economy, moved beyond the box-ticking exercise for business executives, HR, committees for that matter, when considering appointments? Have we moved beyond just that box-ticking and window dressing phase?
In small pockets, there are some places that are moving away from it. I mean, many companies have now decided that, rather than looking at transformation as a yearly exercise for verification, they're looking at it as part of their strategic plan. But the reality is that for many corporates, in South Africa, they still are looking at it as a tick box exercise. They're still looking at it as a last minute thing. And by the time the verification comes, it's really about the points more than anything else, and not really about the people itself. So we're still a long way, unfortunately, but there are some excellent pockets from our observation.
Yeah, some excellent pockets. I asked that question because there's still this culture that persists in South Africa, whether it be highlighted by Mark Lamberti and his most recent comments calling a female employee a female employment equity candidate, or Starbucks on a global scale for that matter, scrambling, via this bias training program it's now putting on for its staff members. That makes one wonder to what extent mindset has actually shifted.
Honestly, mindset has shifted very little. I think, the point being is that corporations in South Africa and many corporations worldwide are responding to transformation on a knee-jerk basis, and they haven't really taken it to heart. Here in South Africa, my opinion is that I think, people really don't know how to deal with it, and in many cases they tend to deal with it from an HR perspective and not from a strategic perspective there. So I think there needs to be a little bit of a mind shift towards the attitude, and the immediate approach to it, that if you're going to be looking at a much more strategic approach to creating a sustainable business, you're more likely to succeed. If you're looking at it as a last minute thing, you're bound to fail.
It seems like a case of easier said than done, though.
Yeah.
I mean, how do you go about changing mindset? We've had Imperial saying that its board has resolved to implement corrective actions to address deficiencies in Imperial's gender and race relations culture. But what's step one? Where do you start? And is this necessarily the answer?
I think step one is acknowledging that there is a problem. I think, if you're willing to face the problem there and say that, you don't really know what to do, and that's where you start off from. And I think if you also then acknowledge that, you've been approaching it from a points perspective, I think you're 50% of the way there. And then based on that, engage as with many people as possible. I think that's the key thing, is communication, communication, communication. Get as much feedback that you can get from, because the power of communicating with as many stakeholders, you're able to draw from the best ideas. What tends to happen in reality is that a small clique of individuals in an organization get together maybe once a quarter, come up with a few ideas, or leave that to a couple of individuals, and then that's transformation for them. But in actual fact, it's a much more broader thing, and therefore it does require a broader engagement with a lot of stakeholders.
And to what extent does it require getting a big stick out, in terms of repercussions? Because with all that's transpired at Imperial, one of the questions that has cropped up is, what does the CEO's resignation really mean? Well,
again, I think there's a very big role that the Department of Labor can play, because they've got a statutory fiduciary duty to ensure that employment equity is actually being implemented in organizations. There is inspections that are done on a regular basis, but the reality is that the capacity that the government departments have at the moment is somewhat limited. I think the last time, for example, the financial services industry had a blitz by the Department of Labor was probably about 8 years ago. So you can already see there that, just in terms of capacity, there isn't very much that we can see in terms of being able to implement it with a stick approach. But that being said, we do have the BE Commissioner, and but their role, again, at the same time, is only somewhat limited from the perspective that they can only investigate on complaints.
Absolutely. Well, as you say, acknowledgement is one of the key steps here. Let's leave the conversation at that point. Israel, thanks so much for having joined us in studio this evening. Of course, Israel Noko is CEO of NPI Governance Consulting.